10, but we're also going to look at a IRB PowerPoint that Dr. Russ put together. So this is a kind of a short chapter. It's a really short chapter. There's not a whole lot in here, and that's the reason I added Dr. Russ's PowerPoint. So let's go ahead and get started. As much fun as that sounds, don't ask me why I picked this this PowerPoint template for single subject research, but I did. Okay, so let's get going. Single subject research is a type of quantitative research that involves studying in detail the behavior of each of a small number of participants. Note that the term single subject does not mean that only one participant is studied. It is more typical for there to be somewhere between 2 and 10 participants. This is why single subject research designs are sometimes called small n designs, where n, of course, is the statistical symbol for the sample size. Single subject research can be contrasted with group research, which typically involves studying large numbers of participants and examining their behavior, primarily in terms of group means, standard deviations, and so on. Case studies involve an in-depth analysis and description of an individual, which is typically primarily qualitative in nature as compared to single subject research. Qualitative research focuses on understanding people's subjective experience by observing behavior and collecting relatively unstructured data, for example, detailed interviews, and analyzing these data using narrative rather than quantitative techniques. Single subject research focuses on understanding objective behavior through experimental manipulation and control, collecting highly structured data and analyzing those data quantitatively. And the reason I put the Rock'em Sock'em Robots in there, it's because it is a contest between case studies and single subject research so that you understand what's going on. And evidently there's a new movie about Rock'em Sock'em Robots with Vin Diesel, so I'm a little confused as to whether he's going to look like one of these guys or like himself. Actually, he does kind of look like one of these guys. There are several important assumptions underlying single subject research. It is important to focus intensively on the behavior of individual participants. Group research can hide individual differences and generate results that do not represent the behavior of any individual. Sometimes it is the behavior of a particular individual that is primarily of interest. And this is a child that's hiding in the coats. A second assumption of single subject research is that it is important to discover causal relationships through the manipulation of an independent variable, the careful measurement of a dependent variable, and the control of extraneous variables. For this reason, single subject research is often considered a type of experimental research with good internal validity. A third assumption of single subject research is that it is important to study strong and consistent effects that have biological or social importance. Applied researchers are interested in treatments that have substantial effects on important behaviors and that can be implemented reliably in the real-world context in which they occur. This is sometimes referred to as social validity. And one of the things that we need to remember here is we're talking a lot about medication. We're talking a lot about treatments and research. But of course, many of you will not be doing this type of research. Look at that foot's turned around backwards. And it's got the wrong shoe on it. I didn't notice that before. Oh, that poor guy. We'll assume that her one leg is behind the other, but this one, I can't figure that one out. Okay. Single subject research has been around as long as the field of psychology itself. In the late 1800s, one of psychology's founders, Wilhelm Wundt, studied sensation and consciousness by focusing intensively on each of a small number of research participants. Hermann Ebbinghaus's research on memory and Ivan Pavlov's research on classical conditioning are other early examples of single subject research. And this, of course, is Wundt's Wilhelm Wundt, and I think they're using sounds in this individual's ears. They got him strapped down. Some features are common to most single subject research designs. The probability that you ever use a single subject research design is fairly remote, but that has to do with treatments, and the probability that you are at this point in your careers that you're going to be doing any treatments on subjects is not very high. The dependent variable is measured repeatedly over time at regular intervals. The study is divided into distinct phases, and the participant is tested under one condition per phase. The conditions are often designated by capital letters A, B, C, and so on. And here we have three different conditions, A, B, and A. Oh, they hit the A again. Okay, well, we're going to talk about that in just a second. An important aspect of single subject research is that the change from one condition to the next does not usually occur after a fixed amount of time or number of observations. Instead, it depends on the participant's behavior. The researcher waits until the participant's behavior in one condition becomes fairly consistent with observation to observation before changing conditions. This is sometimes referred to as the steady state strategy. The idea is that when the dependent variable has reached a steady state, then any change across conditions will be relatively easy to detect. The effect of an independent variable is easier to detect when the noise in the data is minimized. Now you understand why I had that picture. You've got to detect the noise and minimize it. Shh! The most basic single subject research design is the reversal design, also known as the ABA design. We already saw the ABA design right here. A, B, A, and then there would be another B. Potentially there'd be another B. During the first phase A, a baseline is established for the dependent variable. This is the level of responding before any treatment is introduced, and therefore the baseline phase is a kind of control condition. When steady state responding is reached, phase B begins as the researcher introduces the treatment. There may be a period of adjustment to the treatment during which the behavior of interest becomes more variable and begins to increase or decrease. Again, the researcher waits until that dependent variable reaches a steady state so that it is clear whether and how much it has changed. Finally, the researcher removes the treatment and again waits until the dependent variable reaches a steady state. ABA. Okay, so that's A, B, A, B. There you go. In a multiple treatment reversal design, a baseline phase is followed by separate phases in which different treatments are introduced. In an alternating treatments design, two or more treatments are alternated relatively quickly on a regular schedule. And that actually is it. I was a little shocked that there wasn't more information in there, but that was it. So let's go ahead and let's save everything. There we go. No. Save anyway. There we go. Okay. This is a PowerPoint put together by Dr. Russ. She is the head of the IRB at Dene College, and she works directly with the Navajo Nation IRB. So we're going to talk about, and this would be a PowerPoint that she not only shows to her students, but she also shows to individuals wanting to do research on the Navajo Nation and go through the college. Okay. All of the protections provided in the IRB process of non-native, wait a minute, let me see something. Okay. I changed some things. Yeah, I think this is the one I changed. Maybe. Wait a minute. Yeah, it's the one I changed. Okay, we're good. Oh, sorry. Oh, that was interesting, wasn't it? Okay, here we go. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, it was this one I changed because it's got her name on it. Okay, good. Because hers was a little more difficult to visualize, so I tweaked it a little bit. Anyway, I put her name on it. Her name wasn't on it before, and then I told her I was going to do it. She hasn't emailed me back and said, "No, don't do that." All of the protections provided in the IRB process for non-native peoples apply to native peoples. You need informed consent. You need to go to an institutional review board for oversight. You have the right to withdraw at any time. You need to give your subjects the right to withdraw at any time. You need to do a risk-benefit analysis. You need special protections for vulnerable populations, and as it turns out, of course, indigenous people are a vulnerable population, and you need to maintain privacy and confidentiality. These are the basic protections, and that's true for just about that is true for everyone, and it's also one of the reasons why um, it's difficult to do research on children because they are a vulnerable population, and you have to get special approval in order to do research with children. Too often, non-native researchers have disrespected native peoples by using a distant gaze perspective that reduced the native people to specimens, failing to collaborate with native peoples in designing the research, designing studies that had little or no benefit to the native peoples, leaving the communities without sharing their results or conclusions. The Indigenous Research Protection Act established general guidelines. Each tribe then establishes their own rules, policies, and procedures for implementing these guidelines. Navajo Nation Research Review Board posts guidelines at this link, and if you click on that, it'll go to that link. Will it? Yes, it will. There you go. Okay. All research activities should be implemented in a knowledgeable, sensitive manner that is respectful of tribal sovereignty and reflects tribal cultural protection and preservation concerns. I was just thinking, I've got to tell you this. This all comes from the Guiding Principles for Research with Native Communities by Strait et al. It was written in 2012, and we're going to go to the reference at the end of this PowerPoint. It's a little bit longer than my own PowerPoint. There we go. Principle 1, native-centered. Native-centered means that native communities and people are the driving force of the research. Native knowledge is at the heart of the research endeavor, and native peoples are the leaders and the voice. Nothing about us without us. Research activity and action are centered on issues that are central to the native community, not the research center sponsoring institution or the agency. It is the native community. A native-centered approach, researchers spent many hours attending, this is an example. Researchers spent many hours attending community programs, supporting public events, and informally connecting with community members. Members from the community, family members, youth, service providers, elders, and cultural leaders participated in the initial planning meetings and subsequent meetings. By respectfully listening to what the community wanted, researchers could integrate their ideas into the grant proposal. Is your work native-centered, ask yourself. Am I working to achieve my own agenda, or am I working with the community to assist in visualizing, articulating, and developing their plan of action? Is my institution able and or willing to give this Native community the time, resources, and expertise needed to meet their expectations? Principle 2, treat all individuals and communities participating in research with respect. It is an honor to work with Native peoples in research. Purposefully seek understanding of the community and their reasons for collaborating in research. Respect and honor tribal sovereignty, cultural traditions, and diversity among and within Native communities. Be aware and respectful of existing community protocols. Ta-da! A respectful approach is an example again. Principle 2, example of respectful approach. A community member listening to a researcher proposal said, "We have been researched to death, and we never see anything come out of the research." Recognizing that community members might be responding to past injustices or of researchers, the researcher listened and validated their concerns by asking, "What is it that I can do differently?" One person responded, "Show your respect by spending time in our community, being patient and listening when leaders speak. Attend our community events and advocating for our tribe's voice to be heard. Sit back, listen, and be involved." So this is the question you ask yourself. Is your work Native-centered? Am I aware of the protocols for research projects and for convening and facilitating meetings? Do I know people from whom I can learn the protocols? Am I aware of and respecting the government structure, laws, and policies, as well as specific procedures for engaging in research with this community? Am I aware of where the Native community's laws might converge or diverge from the laws and policies of my institution, university, state, etc.? Kind of interesting. I was I went on a Fulbright trip in 2003, and for some reason they put us two old guys together. And so the individual that I was rooming with on the trip he was the oldest guy on the trip. I was the second oldest guy on the trip, and he was from New York City, and he had majored in indigenous studies, which is not that unnatural, but he's from New York City. So he, when he did his research, and he went to New York University, and he did his research on the Navajo Nation, and he came out to the Navajo Nation. And some of the people that he tried to interview couldn't speak English. And so he had to hire an interpreter, this guy from New York City. And if you've ever been around somebody from New York, they want things to go really fast. Come on, that kind of stuff. So the first thing he had to learn was patience, and the next thing he had to learn was silence. He had a really hard time understanding, and so he asked one of the elders a question. And the guy just kind of sat there, and he's thinking, did he understand what I said? Is he mad at me? What's going on? And finally he said something, and he asked, is there a problem with the question? And the guy told him, well, John, your questions are so interesting, and I want to give you the best answer I possibly can. That's why I'm sitting here and thinking about this so much. So poor John got put in his place, and he learned even more patience than he had before. Silence was the most difficult thing for him to learn. It wasn't really the patience; it was the silence. He couldn't handle the silence. Principle 3, self-reflection and cultural humility. Be mindful of one's own cultural and class biases and how these biases can affect researcher interactions with Native people. Strive to develop self-awareness and have a respectful and humble attitude toward diverse points of view and traditions. Base your research on the understanding that Native people have wisdom, knowledge, expertise, and experience that are relevant to their community and to our efforts as investigators. Refrain from believing that one has attained cultural competence, as it is a lifelong process. And this is something that is everybody needs to be mindful of. The fact that I know about being a farm boy from Indiana, but that's just about it. I've traveled all around the world, and I am aware that I am aware of other cultures and that I recognize them. And I see all cultures as equal, but I also recognize the fact that I will never be part of that culture. I cannot be part of that culture because I'm not from there, and that's fine. And that's one of the reasons. See, I consider your language. I consider the Dene language holy, and I don't want to pretend that I understand what is behind what you say. Um, I had this conversation early on with when I was talking to Wilson. Very first day I was here, I sat down at at a table of the guys teaching teaching on the fifth floor, and they were a little surprised that I had the temerity to sit down. But the only guy that was older than me was Wilson, of course, and so we had a conversation about it, and I told them. They said, "Well, are you going to learn the Dene language?" And I said, "No, I understand that your language is holy, and I would rather respect that by not trying to interpret what you're saying, because that is for you to do, not for me to do." And they all agreed that was not a bad idea. They kind of got irritated when people treated their holy language like as if it were just another language. Anyway, and after that, Wilson and Avery were my pals. uh, so, okay, so this is an example of a reflective and humble approach. I think I just showed you one. But let's go ahead with this one. Reflection and humility. A Native researcher was attending a meeting in her own Native community where she was introduced as a resource from the university, who handed out program materials and business cards. The community's initial response was, "We are all resources too," and they pushed the researcher's materials aside. The researcher realized that the introduction and the institutional authority implied to this introduction that she considered herself an expert who was superior to others. She reflected on this and learned a more humble mindset in which she recognized the community members as equals. Do you have a reflective, humble approach? Ask yourself. Am I using my position, credentials, or power for this person, community? Am I continually mindful and actively reflecting on myself or any assumptions I may be making that influence the way I interact with others and conduct research? Am I recognizing the expertise of everyone in the community? Principle 4, authentic relationships. Build relationships that are sincere, enduring, and based upon mutual trust and respect. Relationship-based research will emerge and survive through challenges with positive transformations on all sides of the partnership. Enter into partnership with the community and community members with the intention of building and sustaining a long-term commitment to the community. Now, this is really kind of tough because they don't belong to the community, but they have to maintain a commitment and a relationship with the community for an extended length of time. Not the easiest thing in the world. Not the easiest thing in the world for somebody like me, a military person who has traveled from one place to the other. The only way you can really survive that kind of a situation where you're constantly moving is by letting go of the community that you're leaving and embracing the community that you're going into. I know that sounds kind of cold if you've never moved a lot, but since we've moved a lot, we know that that's the only way you can do it. I don't belong there anymore. I belong here. Principle 4, this is an example of an authentic approach. A local researcher was asked to assist a rural native community during a crisis. He gave the community his full attention and was genuine in his willingness to serve, engaging with many community members and providers as they coped. Once the crisis was over, the community asked him to work on other projects that would benefit their tribe. Again, he was genuine and always willing to help. His years working with the tribe have led to authentic partnerships and lasting friendships. Community members often call him and send him emails when they want him to review something. The tribal members have grown fond of the provider and engage in research projects with him to this day. Do you have an authentic approach? Ask yourself, how am I demonstrating that I am fully present with this person/community? Am I an active participant in interactions and interpersonal moments that show my sincerity in assisting the community? Am I willing to commit to working through challenges that will inevitably arise to grow and learn within myself as I get to know the community and develop relationships that may extend beyond the life of the project? Principle 5, honor community timeframes. Concepts of time differ among various cultures, influenced by seasonal cycles, traditional events, and governmental functions. Research culture sometimes creates pressure to get things done quickly, or may move so slowly that Native people doubt whether the original purpose of the project will meet community needs in a timely fashion. Many Native people value time to process information. This time may be used to reflect on new concepts or translate the concepts into Native thought. Provide time for moments of thoughtful silence. Examples of a time-aware approach. When planning research, a researcher asked a local tribe community member what to keep in mind during the year-long project. The liaison described events, ceremony, political activities, funerals, school functions, etc., throughout the coming year, and recommended that the researcher develop a timeline that encompassed both the research and community events. The researcher made sure to keep her timeline flexible and allow additional time at the end for unexpected community events. Now you can tell this is not written on the Navajo Nation. This actually comes out of University of New Mexico. But you're planning funerals? Come on, what are you planning? And the truth is, if you guys have ever been on other reservations, you know that funerals on other reservations are treated differently. I was working at Fort Belknap, as I've told you ad nauseum. I was working at Fort Belknap, and they treat funerals very, very differently than the Dene people do. They have a funeral, they have a celebration, they have a wake. If the guy's was a military member, the wake will last for 2 or 3 days, and they have to be accompanied by a veteran all the time, the whole time. And of course, being a veteran myself, I was often tapped, usually for that graveyard shift, sometime between midnight and 4 o'clock, or 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. That was always my shift. Anyway, so their funerals, they will grieve for about 2 weeks. And so if I had students that were part of that family, a lot of times I'd lose them for a couple of weeks before they'd come back to school. and I had to anticipate that. That was the interesting part. I had to anticipate that they'd be gone for a while, and that was okay. And that's one of the reasons why I developed the no not that I don't count out for late work, because they kind of conditioned me to think in those terms, and so yeah, that's what I do anyway. And they also, of course, they powwow. So one of the things that happens, they will give you a year to grieve for your lost relative, and then they'll dance you back into the circle, which means, that you come back and start powwowing again. Um, okay, there's. Do you have a time-aware approach? Ask yourself, is my time frame realistic for the research project in relation to the community's activity level? Am I planning accordingly given the different concepts of time? What projects or activities occur annually to which my community partners will need to attend? Am I giving the community time to translate the project into its own native worldview? And not surprisingly, how can I talk about religion? Religion was sometimes a problem because there were, I'm talking about Fort Belknap. They had three different religious structures. The Catholic Church had been there for a while, and of course they had the traditional religion. And then there was an evangelical log church. There was an evangelical movement on the reservation, and the three just kind of knocked heads all the time. It was really kind of curious, and it's one of the reasons, I think I told you guys this. It's one of the reasons I left spirituality out as a factor in resilience. It's because those arguments were real for those individuals. Um, so I didn't want to cause any problems. uh, Principle 6, build on strengths. Become aware of the strengths and particular abilities within Native communities. Explicitly recognize these aspects and build upon them. Focus on communities' culturally protective strengths and other assets throughout all stages of research. Use a tone in your written research that emphasizes resiliency factors and inspires hope. Example of strength-oriented approach. A new researcher was excited to begin a project in a Native community and came to the initial meeting with the data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Department of Health and Indian Health Services. He brought up concerns regarding the high rates of alcohol use, depression, diabetes, and adverse childhood events among this population, asking community partners why and how these statistics are played out in their community. After the initial meeting was over, the community partners were left with feelings of negativity and hopelessness. They were not sure that they wanted to continue working with this researcher because he pointed out all the bad things going on in their community. This might have been avoided had the researcher balanced out his meeting by bringing forth some positive qualities inherent in the community. And you have to ask yourself, am I actively searching for positive qualities or strengths in the community? Am I coming from a positive or a negative framework in how I perceive the community? And of course, I've already explained to you the situation that I was in. I wanted to do research. People kept telling me, well, there's a lot of alcoholism, there's a lot of drug abuse, there's a lot of child abuse, there's a lot of spousal abuse. Why don't you look at fixing some of those things? And of course, my point was, I hear a lot of negative stuff, but I see a lot of positive stuff, and I'd rather do something that was more positive. And one of the reasons I had a difficult time getting my research approved on the reservation was because they were afraid if I said something positive that they'd lose some of their funding for their alcohol abuse program, their drug abuse program, and other programs that were on the reservation. that somebody would use those statistics against them, which was kind of interesting, kind of an interesting idea. But I saw positives they wanted to see. They wanted to accentuate their negatives, as weird as that sounds. But it's not weird because they're talking about money. So money talks, and we won't talk about the rest of it. Principle 7, co-learning and ownership. Co-learning involves a reciprocal exchange of knowledge and ideas. Tribal members bring their expertise across multiple areas. Researchers bring expertise in academic research methods and processes. Communities learn and benefit in ways that better their community. Researchers benefit by gaining important knowledge from community members. Researchers acknowledge that everyone has important contributions to make in research. Native communities have the right to ownership and control over their own data and may choose whether to share ownership of the data. And this is an example of a reciprocal approach. Native Community and Research Center collaborated to determine the degrees to which their culture and traditions would be included in the project. Both community members and researchers took different sections of the grant to write, with all contributing equally to the final product. Research partners provided technical assistance during the grant writing process to facilitate the community's capacity to write grants on their own in the future, and community members helped researchers to gain approval for the project from the leaders. Researchers learn the approval process in the community, while the community members learn the approval process through the institutional IRB. This process helped build capacity for the community and for the researchers, instilling a sense of pride and ownership that carried the project forward even after funding ended. Do you have an authentic approach? Ask yourself, how am I helping to build capacity in the community through the research process, for example, using research funds for equipment retained by the community, hiring community members, bringing tribal representatives to the research center, providing training, etc. And what am I learning from the community that increases my own skills and capacity? Am I providing community members opportunities to contribute their knowledge in meaningful ways? Am I prioritizing the use of existing programs and resources in the community? In what ways am I encouraging community members to take ownership of the project to ensure sustainability? Principle 8, continual dialogue. Whoops, hit the wrong button. Ensure the communication to the members of the community involved is understandable, relevant, and accessible. Seek two-way communication. A continual and open dialogue may facilitate co-learning, prevent misunderstandings, and address concerns before they become problems. Be proactive in finding out the appropriate people and programs needed for ongoing communication within each community and research project. Provide findings back to community stakeholders on an ongoing basis. A communicative approach. A researcher came before the tribal council. Council, when was the last time you provided this council with an update on this project? Researcher, I have not provided an update on the council since the project was approved by the Institutional Review Board 2 years ago last spring. I didn't know I was required to. The council's questioning caused the researcher to reflect on her own expectations for communication, leading her to put more effort in aligning with the community's protocol for how information flows between community and the researcher. And so, do you have a communicative approach? Am I actively listening? Am I choosing not to talk in order to give community members a chance to speak? Am I intentionally creating a relationship and atmosphere that allows my partners to feel comfortable enough to bring us up issues of concern? Am I communicating with proper stakeholders of this community? Is there a health board, tribal IRB, health director, tribal council, or traditional leader with whom I should be in contact? Am I updating the right people at the right time? Principle 9, transparency and accountability. Be open and clear about all activities and information throughout the research process in order to build trust, which may have been compromised by past negative research endeavors in the community. Take responsibility for all actions and consequences of those actions when engaging in research with communities. And this is examples. A tribal leader was concerned at the way her community was portrayed on a researcher's webpage. When asked about this information, the researcher stated that he had assumed the proper approvals had already been obtained and that the posting was not his fault. The researcher did not reveal that he had deliberately avoided informing them for fear that it would cause unneeded discussion and delays over a seemingly small detail. The community lost some trust with this researcher for not being open and for not taking the responsibility to remedy the situation. So you must ask yourself, have I clearly defined what my position as a researcher entails? Have I clearly communicated what my institution can and cannot agree to or provide? Should these expectations be in writing? Am I being open about taking responsibility for all research activities? Do I know do I know whose approval is needed for different aspects of my project? Do I know whom to work with in the community regarding consents, permissions, etc.? I got a fly that's just bugging me to death, but I got it. Principle 10, integrity. Be vigilant about protecting Native communities and individuals from harm. Work to preserve and strengthen the wholeness of Native peoples and communities. Understand that the community's rights take precedence over the researcher's pursuit of knowledge and personal career development. Act with honesty and morality throughout every phase of research. Adhere to the existing ethical guidelines that are developed for and by Native peoples and communities, in addition to general ethical guidelines for researchers. So this is an example. A tribal council required a researcher to delete a major finding from his submitted presentation before they would give approval for the researcher to present at an upcoming conference. After much discussion, the researcher asked if there was any way that the information could be presented in a more acceptable manner in order to keep this central finding in the presentation. Ultimately, the researcher took out this finding from the presentation. This researcher struggled with which guidelines to adhere in order to maintain the integrity of his work, and decided that the reasons for which this Native community had asked him to take out his findings held greater justice for this community than would be demonstrated in presenting the findings. So you need to ask yourself, how am I showing my integrity? What are the code of ethics to which I refer in guiding my actions and decisions to ensure the morality of my research? Where is all the private confidential documentation being kept? How will all the private confidential documentation be handed back to the community or destroyed at the end? If destroyed, how will this be documented? Principle 11, community relevance. Be mindful that historical experiences directly relate to Native communities, present situations, and impact the relevance of any research project. Develop research projects that have meaning and purpose within the Native community's way of being and knowing. Ensure that research findings are useful and accessible to participating communities by providing information that contributes to tribal-specific solutions, greater well-being, and positive policy impact. Example of Principle 11. A relevant inquiry. A researcher came before tribal leadership to present an HIV prevention project that she wanted to begin at a school-based clinic in the village, supporting counseling and testing as an HIV prevention strategy. Leadership was skeptical of the need for such an intervention and questioned whether it was the most productive use of the clinic's limited resources, indicating that the well being of their youth was of utmost importance and they were open to other project ideas that may better meet concerns such as substance abuse and teen pregnancy and the loss of their tribal language. The researchers still hoped to offer her expertise in children's behavioral health, but also realized her previous proposal did not take into account the community's present concerns. Later, the researcher presented a comprehensive substance abuse and risky sexual behavior prevention project that focused on strengthening cultural identity through language preservation. Tribal leadership endorsed the project and devoted tribal resources to support the program. Yeah, risky sexual behavior, right. I'm sorry. Why call it risky sex? It's just sexual behavior. Anyway. Risky. Okay, so you need to ask yourself, how is this research going to help the community and or individuals in addressing the community's identified priorities, for example, treatment, intervention, prevention, jobs, training, and equipment? Can I provide culturally relevant recommendations and engage in socially responsive action at a systematic level? You know, I keep talking about risky sexual behavior like it's, I don't know, like you're riding on a motorcycle or something. But, you know, the reality is it's just sexual behavior. The only thing you're risking is pregnancy, and that's not a negative thing. Anyway, it just struck me. I've been saying risky sexual behavior for decades, and especially talking about college students. And it just hit me that that's probably, it's just sexual behavior. It's not anything that has to do with risk, except for the pregnancy part of it. Applying the ethic. The protections that are in place for work with indigenous peoples represent an overarching ethic aligned with the greater values of many indigenous cultures. As graduates of Dene College, these principles can guide your interactions with all research participants and represent the values you offer in any research project. And there is the source right there. Straits, Bird, Sinagini, Espinoza, Goodkind, Spencer, Tafoya, Wilging, and the Guiding Principles Workshop. And this is the title of it. You can find it right here, or you can find it at the address on the bottom. It's a PDF. And it's out of the UNM Center for Rural and Community Behavioral Health and Albuquerque Area Southwest Tribal Epidemiology Center. And the reason that some of these things were not Dene specific is because it is out of the University of New Mexico. And of course, they're not just dealing with the Dene people, they're also dealing with the Pueblo peoples, the Apaches, I don't know who else is there. Lots and lots of people. Anyway, they're dealing with a lot of people. A lot of different groups, a lot of different groupings. So if you want to read it, it's right there. Okay, so that is the end. I think that's the end. Yeah, that's the end. Okay, so I'll talk to you again next week. I'm not sure what the chapter is next week. Let me find out. Presenting your research is the next topic. So there you go. We're getting close to the end. I need to talk to some of you guys about your research proposals. I'm so buried with this quality matters stuff. I should be ashamed of myself. And I am. Okay, well, I'll talk to you guys next week.